Okay guys, we're going to continue with the study of the peripheral nervous system where we left off. This is where we left off with some neurotransmitters and what they do. So one of the ones you have to know here is called acetylcholine. You might see it abbreviated like that, but it enables muscle action, learning, and memory. And what's important here is that if you don't have it, if you don't have those neurons and they start to deteriorate or basically break down, that's what happens with Alzheimer's and memory loss. Dopamine is the next one. It influences movement, learning, attention, and emotion. And so if you have too much of it or excess dopamine, that can be linked to schizophrenia. And if you don't have enough, that can be produces tremors and decreased movement and some of the side effects of Parkinson's disease. Serotonin, you may have heard of. It affects mood, hunger, sleep, and arousal. So if you don't have enough of it or undersupply, that can be linked to depression. So Prozac and a lot of antidepressants, they raise serotonin levels to bring that up. So a lot of times when people take those antidepressants, it can, where is it here? It's also linked to hunger, so sometimes people gain weight on those antidepressants. The next one, norepinephrine, helps control alertness and arousal. So again, if you don't have enough of this or an undersupply, it can depress mood, also lead to depression. So some depressions are not only linked to not enough serotonin, but also not enough norepinephrine in their body. The next one, GABA, we're just going to call it GABA. It's what they call a major inhibitory neurotransmitter. So an undersupply of this, or not having enough of it, is linked to seizures, tremors, and insomnia. Insomnia means, the inability to, or you can't sleep. So some epilepsy and other seizure disorders are linked to that particular neurotransmitter. Glutamate is the last one. So it's a major, what they call excitatory neurotransmitter. That just means, excitability involved in memory. So an oversupply or having too much of it can overstimulate the brain. So that could be, again, a cause of seizures. So seizures could be caused by that neurotransmitter GABA or the neurotransmitter glutamate. An oversupply, so too much of it, can produce migraines, really terrible headaches, or seizures. MSG, you may have heard of being in some foods. So some foods are labeled as having no MSG, but it's called monosodium glutamate. But glutamate can be in some foods, and some people avoid it because it can potentially lead to headaches. The last thing, one of the last things we'll do here is how neurotransmitters can affect us or influence us. One of these things is endo, or what they call endorphins. And remember that prefix, if you think endo, think inside. So these things are produced within or inside the body. And they are what's called a natural morphine. And morphine, you probably have heard of, that basically if you have enough morphine, the medicine morphine, it kills pain. So this sort of explains why sometimes it's what's called a runner's high or an exercise high. And also, it's why sometimes we don't feel anything right after an injury. Sort of that shock, but it's because of the release of endorphins that you don't feel pain sometimes right after an injury. So that's endorphins, endo meaning inside. Agonist versus antagonist. An agonist excites something, neurotransmission, and an antagonist inhibits or stops that movement. One example of an agonist is if a spider were to bite you, particularly if it's a black widow spider, it floods those synapses or those connections with acetylcholine. And if you remember, normal acetylcholine levels allows muscle movement. So if you have an agonist affecting it, it will enhance that action. Let's think back here. It says acetylcholine enables muscle action. So think here, if you have too much of it, or if you're flooding your system with acetylcholine, the result could be incredibly violent muscle contractions, too much movement, and convulsions is something else, convulsions, and possibly death caused by too much acetylcholine in the body. So that, again, excites. That's an agonist. An antagonist is the next one we'll talk about. So botulism, it blocks acetylcholine release from sending the neuron. And you may have heard of botulism, I'm not sure, but botulism is caused by actually a bacteria. And acetylcholine allows movement, and if it is inhibited, it would stop movement. So this ability to move could be paralysis. And what's interesting, I think, is that Botox, you've heard of people using it for wrinkles. What it does is it paralyzes the underlying muscles. So underneath those wrinkles, what it does, it actually paralyzes muscles. And it's an extraction of a bacteria. And one of the side effects, if you ever listen to the commercials for Botox, is that it could potentially kill you, which is kind of crazy to think about. But too much Botox, or if Botox were to spread throughout your body, because it is a bacteria, it could, again, spread throughout your body and cause severe problems with the bacterial infection. That's in very rare cases, but it is because it's caused or extracted from a bacteria. Another example is curare. It's poison from a poisonous frog. It's just one example from South American Indians that they apply to the tips of their hunting darts, and it also blocks acetylcholine receptor site. So if a human was hit with the dart, what do you think would happen? Potential paralysis. So here we go, just kind of to review the peripheral nervous system. So we have two systems. One is peripheral, the other one is the central nervous system, which we haven't gotten to yet. That's the brain and spinal cord. So what I've mentioned today is the peripheral nervous system, and there's two sections of it. And they do kind of sound, they do what they sound like. Think automatically. So these things, what they say, are self-regulated. You don't have to tell your body to do it. And then somatic, these are voluntary. Okay, so of those involuntary, or your body automatically does those things, of the autonomic, there's what's called the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And think I'm going to get to these in a second, but these are arousing, so exciting, or the parasympathetic, which is a calming feeling. So let's, I'll go ahead and skip that and come here. Okay, so you've got again, two groups of the peripheral nervous system. You have the somatic, and so these are voluntary control of our movement or skeletal system. The autonomic nervous system, it is what controls the involuntary. So that would be involuntary. That could be glands. That could be breathing. That could also be your heart rate. Digestion is another one. So those are all involuntary. You don't tell your body to do those things. So of the autonomic, we've got the sympathetic nervous system, so that is arousal. So again, your heartbeat, if your heartbeat accelerates, goes up, your blood pressure goes up, those are all, again, sorry, coming back. So let's say, you were to get scared by something, your heartbeat goes up, your blood pressure gets high, digestion wouldn't necessarily be caused by that, but also like you may start to sweat. You can't control those things, but those are, again, autonomic because you're not controlling them, but they are a reaction. Parasympathetic nervous system, these are the things that would calm you after, let's say, you got scared, or any sort of arousal or nervous system. So it's the opposite effect of what I just said. Opposite effect as the one I just mentioned above. So you got the sympathetic, which is going to accelerate, and the parasympathetic that would calm you down. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system, I think this is the last thing here. So parasympathetic, again, that's the arousal. So another thing that, like if your pupils get dilated, sometimes that also happens when you get scared. So that is an arousal. So that dilates your pupil. But then the calming side of that is whenever it's going to go back down, when it'll contract or get smaller. Another thing, like I said, if the heart rate accelerates, that's sympathetic. And when it slows back down, that's parasympathetic. Some of these other ones get kind of confusing in my opinion, because if you think of something being aroused, you wouldn't think as something being inhibited, or if it's calming that it would get stimulated. So I won't ask you about these just because I find them to be kind of confusing. But we can go ahead and so if it's aroused, these bottom things, it can stimulate or allow blood flow. That's something else. But basically just kind of remember the big idea of if it's part of the sympathetic nervous system, that is, again, accelerating, and you need the parasympathetic to kind of calm you back down and bring you back to normal. So those are, that's basically it for the peripheral nervous system. And my next lecture will be on the brain and the central nervous system. But that's where we'll stop for now.